Welcome back to Talking Guitar, brought to you by the North American Guitar in Nashville, Tennessee. Lindsay here, and today I'm excited to finally release my massive, winding chat with the one and only Grit Laskin, in person from his workshop up in Toronto. I had the delightful task of going up to visit him for a day to pick up one of our clients' guitars, and he was kind enough to take a few hours out of his day to show me his workshop, let me take photos, and get deep into the weeds on his history, projects, and inspirations. You likely already know Grit for his stunning inlay work, incredible craftsmanship, and his innovative and influential arm bevel and soundport designs. But maybe you don't yet know about his time with John Larrivee, or his bands and his many albums, or the record label that he started to promote niche folk musicians, or the music camp that he and his wife ran, or about the Group of Seven project and all the special causes that he builds for. The TLDR of this chat is that Grit is an incredibly inspired, busy, community-focused guy, and at the heart of everything he does is music and connection. In addition to being live and in person, I've dropped loads of photos in throughout our chat, so this is a great one to catch on YouTube if you're not there already. Or you can also visit our blog to see the collection, and links will be in the show notes. Now, enjoy my chat with Grit Laskin. Thank you so much for welcoming me here into your workshop. This is such an exciting experience.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's safe to say that our whole audience knows who you are, knows at least something about you, because your influence has been so huge, and even if they only know that you're responsible for the Laskin-style bevel or the soundport, they've come in contact with your work in some way. But I'll be sure to rattle off lots of your other accomplishments in the official podcast intro, because you've done so many amazing things.
Okay, well, I won't complain. All right, okay.
But I think anybody, just by looking at or playing just one of your guitars, can tell that you're an uncommon person. You really pull in a lot of different influences and disciplines and skill sets. I mean, because it's not just the guitar, it's the inlay work and everything. So I am so excited to talk more about your musical influences and just your whole past. So,
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have no secrets. So anything you want to know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I want to know, because as I told you earlier, I discovered your collection of albums on Spotify, which I was so excited because I think we probably share a lot of the same influences. Obviously, I knew that you love Peggy Seeger because of that guitar last year.
Yeah.
But I want to know more about, especially your instrumental influences. Who got you excited to start playing?
That's interesting. Okay. Well, as a kid, I started playing guitar when I was 9 years old, and my parents sent me to lessons to learn the Mel Bay method until that bored me to tears and I stopped playing and for a couple of years. And then a friend taught me both how to fingerpick and how to learn things off a record. How to listen and understand that when you're hearing it that way, that's telling you they're not in first position anymore. They're playing a G in second position or third. Try it until the sound matches, And that's how I learned, Paul Simon songs off the record or Joni Mitchell G tunings or whatever it was at that time. That's how I did it. And I've never stopped. Yeah. So I would then go to the library and I was poking through books of photographs of folkies by David Garr, G-A-H-R. He was the guy in the 60s who photographed everybody at festivals. Okay. And there's a picture of, names when I need them, from the Byrds, Roger McGuinn. Okay. And it's underneath the caption, it said, Roger McGuinn studied at Chicago's Old Town School of Folk Music. And I thought, I have found my post-secondary education. So I go to the guidance counselor, and she's got her big binder of all post-secondary, and she's looking and she can't find this anywhere. So I wrote them a little note. I just put Old Town School of Folk Music, Chicago, USA, and it got there. And I got a note back saying, thank you for your interest, but we're just, we teach lessons and we put on concerts. We're not a post-secondary education. Right. So I couldn't go, but I've never forgotten that. And then I started thinking about, what will I do? I saw on the back of Bruce Coburn's first album that I had bought, at the back of his record, early days, before people always credited everybody who did everything, but he happened to mention the studio. And I went, Eastern Sound Studio in Toronto. I looked it up. There was no internet at that time, but I did some research and I went to the library and found some articles about them. Oh, they're the only 24 track in the studio in the city, and they had 3 studio rooms. Maybe they have room for somebody. I thought maybe that's what I want to do, engineering. I hitchhiked to Toronto, got a job as a gopher at this studio, and I was 17. Came back, told them I've quit school, and see ya. Of course, they freaked out, and they exacted a promise that if this doesn't work out, I will go back to university. And I said yes. Well, I was there 6 months, and I was being overworked. And literally, it was setting up and tearing down all studios, doing all the dubbing of the ads, the musical ads, which is mostly what they did there, and big dubbing machines, 1/4-inch tape. So you would take the master and you would run 6 dubbers that would copy it, and then you'd have to check that it didn't leave it blank, put them in envelopes, and you'd make 150 of them that would then be mailed out to all the radio stations. That's how they got the ads in the old days, right? And I would do that, and then I would also run the 35 millimeter projector when they were doing sync sound for films. Anyway, I was doing all of that. I was burning out. I went there for the music. I'm mostly seeing ad executives, mostly, not entirely. Met some musicians. And so I quit, was just playing music for a couple of months, living on a friend's couch, when I saw a Larrivee guitar at the Toronto Folklore Centre, which was a music store, lesson place. And
is it still around?
No. But it was for decades. And it was started actually by an American from New York who used to play music in Washington Square during the 60s folk boom, came up here, and like Izzy Young, he wanted to start a folklore center. So he was an expat. Anyway, he did, and that's where I saw a Larrivee guitar, and to this day I can remember playing it and playing it and looking down at the headstock veneer and the mahogany of the neck and thinking, I'm not seeing a glue line. How is that done? How is that even humanly possible? That one piece of wood can stop and another one starts. Next thing I know, I'm heading to the Mariposa Folk Festival on the Toronto Islands, and John Larrivee is showing off his wares in the craft section for the first time.
Wow.
And I meet John, this scruffy, hairy kid, 17 years old. Would you be willing to take me on as an apprentice? And he said, well, this is days before climate control. He said, when I start up again, late September, past the humid weather, because you can't really assemble anything in the humidity, come on by and we'll give it a try. After 3 months, if it's not working out, I'll tell you. And it did work out. Yeah. And at the time, a guy named Sergei DeYoung, Serge we call him, was hanging out in John's basement, whereas he was building in the basement of his suburban home, and just drinking beer and watching him work. And I don't know what Serge was doing at the time, but he was young too. And then I met John just as he was renting his first workshop and setting it up that summer. So I came by in September. Serge was there and me, and he was splitting the shop. This is probably more information than you need. I apologize. But he's splitting the shop with the Toronto Folklore Centre, who he'd gotten to know, and they wanted a place for the repairs to happen. So they brought up a guy from Mossman Guitars to half do the repairs, half-time work for John, and there was Serge, and there was me. In 2 months, the guy who came up from Mossman, all he did was smoke his pipe all day and talk. And got almost nothing done. John said, I can't work with you. And Serge, at that point, left to work with an experimental classical guitar maker elsewhere in Ontario.
Oh, okay.
And he's actually the first person to do lattice bracing on classicals.
Oh, that's right.
It wasn't, what's his name, from Australia. It was this guy, and when I was an apprentice with John, we would drive out and visit with him, and I'd see what he was doing. And that's because in his professional career, he was an airline engineer, an aircraft engineer.
Wow.
So he was using the structure that supported wings of small aircraft. And he thought, that's stronger. Why don't I try doing that?
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was a sidebar. So Serge went to work with him, and I remember John was going out with Wendy at the time, just getting to know her. They were dating. And he brought Wendy and me into his main workroom, shut the door, and he said, you two are the only one I can work with. I'm getting rid of everybody else. That's the only one. So then it was basically John and I for the rest of the bulk of 2 years.
Crazy.
Except for the last 6 months when David Wren came at night after his day job, as he worked for a graphic arts firm. And he would come and we'd get him cutting blocks and sweeping the floor. And then when I left to open up my shop, Dave quit his job, started working with John.
Okay.
And then later, when he was still in Toronto, but at a different location, he had 5 or 6 people. It was about a couple years after that, Linda joined him and a few other people. And then they went out west with him, but then realized this is becoming not something they were interested in. It's becoming more of a production shop.
I see.
So they came back, and John has grown ever since.
Yeah.
John Larrivée. He came out of poverty in the eastern townships of Quebec. That's a region, it's called that, the Eastern Townships. And came to Toronto, became a licensed mechanic. That was his main job. And he was so naturally gifted at thinking mechanically that he had the highest exam results in this province at the time. And then when I was with him, we would drive down to New York to the docks to pick up lumber. These big lumber dealers would hardly give you the time of day for your little nothing, because they were selling to big lumber chains across the country and everything, right? And we just wanted a couple of billets of ebony. And finally, they get around to letting you buy something. And then we drive, these billets, these wax-covered hunks of ebony logs back. And I remember John's frustration at being so small they wouldn't even give him the time of day. That and the drive to get out of poverty and his natural inclination points to somebody perfectly suited for tooling up for manufacturing. In fact, his hobby when I was with him was to spend his nights going to a friend's machine shop and remaking all his tools. I'm talking about even shapers. He would make the high-speed steel spiral cutters, a shape that he liked better than the ones you could buy.
Wow.
That's incredible talent to do that.
Yeah.
That was his hobby. Buy a new machine, pull it all apart, and make all new parts for it.
Jeez.
So talk about set for tooling up, the incentive to make money and to never have to worry about money in your life.
Right.
And anyway.
The prowess to, just expand
So you
all
could
that.
see that the way he went was natural for him. Whereas me and Linda and Dave, and we took the art route of individual dealing with, one customer at a time sort of thing. And that makes me happy. And also with my customers, besides all the customized elements of the physical thing that you can tailor to their needs or their problems. Then we get into the inlay art, which speaks to them personally. It's such a multi-layered, rich transaction. Yeah. And I love that. I become friends with all my customers.
Yeah, I love every luthier seems to say that. That's so sweet.
Yeah, and I love that aspect of it. And really they do. I've gone and, a customer in Norway, and we visited him, and Singapore, and, wherever. And we get together when we can. It's really gratifying.
Yeah.
And feeding you. And it's so the antithesis of the digital culture, where less and less of us know how everything actually works. I think that's where, the reaction of, vinyl coming back, and even, this little sub pocket, they want cassettes back, stuff like that. It's all just people feeling the need for tactile.
Yeah, just wanting to understand and conceptualize very much in the real world,
And even people, younger people who stopped going into music stores to buy CDs, but you'd find out when I talked to them, and this is because I had a record company for 25 years, right?
Yeah.
That I would talk to them and say, well, what do you do? Do you go listen to bands? Oh, yeah, I go to live shows, And do you buy their music? And oh, yeah, for sure. They don't equate that with purchasing a CD. When you ask them, they think, you mean like walk into a record store and buy it? Well, they don't do that. But they were happy to buy it from the person because they have the satisfaction of handing the creator the money and showing them support. To me, we're instrument makers are part of this phenomenon of the artisanal values in our modern society. Yeah. And at the same time, I remember when I was part of the provincial craft organization, I was on its board for a while, blah, blah, blah. And I remember giving a talk at some symposium or something, and just talking about the fact that you could, during a recession when retail was suffering, even craft stores were suffering. People weren't coming in to buy the pottery or the stained glass or whatever it was, or the wood-turned bowls. But people were going to craft shows where they could meet the creator personally. Because of that personal connection, it became an appealing transaction. Whereas, so it's not that they were afraid to spend their money, it's just they wanted something better than just handing it to a clerk in a store.
Definitely.
And the craft shows were booming, and people were selling well at the same time as their own work that they had sold to a store was hardly moving.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Anyway.
It makes sense, because I think we all have so many options now, and so it's almost like paradox of choice, but one way to sort of narrow the focus is to find the people who you can actually meet and actually have that personal transaction with, which is nice.
So I feel incredibly lucky, you know, to be doing something that I love. Yeah, that doesn't mean every day is wonderful. You know, there's days when everything seems to be turning to shit. You know, of course, the wood is doing something you never predicted, and no matter how many years you do this, there's always something new that can happen. Or the thing that hasn't happened to you in 40 years is going to happen again. And then, oh no, not this again. You know, so I mean, welcome to life, right?
Yeah.
That's that way in everything. But you know, some people retire from the business world to learn to be a guitar maker because they've always played and they like the idea of making their guitar, whatever it might be. I'm doing it now, and then we get to the inlay art, where this other dimension to my creative need, I'm getting paid to do.
Yeah.
Don't tell anybody, you know, or they won't do it, you know. And some people have even said, you know, Grit, you could be charging a lot more for the inlay because you're doing things nobody else is doing. Yeah. And I said, yeah, but you know, I only inlay my own guitars. And it's in the context of people already buying expensive instruments. Right. If I raise the price, I could get more, but it also means I probably couldn't do as many full projects because people would be out of budget. Yeah. And I'd like to be able to do this. And it's still pricey. I mean, you know, a full neck inlay, you know, that can add, you know, at you know, $105 an hour. I'm over 100 hours very frequently. Yeah. So that's a big chunk of change. Yeah. You know, and it's basically people buying art at the same time, but it's personal. Yeah, it's personal and functional. Yeah, and I even tell them that when we're discussing themes. I said, no, you know, don't do another dragon. Anybody can do that. What has meaning for you in your life? And then tell me what it is, and then tell me why it has meaning, so I can understand how to depict it for you. You know, one time somebody said, "Well, fishing." I said, "Okay, but what is it about fishing?" He said, "You know what? It's not even catching the fish. It's that I can slow down from my normal hectic life as I stand in the stream, waiting for a bite in beautiful nature on a gorgeous day." Yeah. He said, "That's what I long for. Is the mood." And the quietness and the pace drop. So I tried to capture that, as opposed to, well, you know, here's a trout, you know, at the end of a line, you know. So it's things like that, you know, and I just love doing that, and I love the challenge. So even when it's through a dealer, like you guys, as happened, I always say I need to talk to the individual in person. It's more that I need to hear their way of expressing the things that are important to them, because that tells me how important, you know. And when they keep repeating something, or there's a tone in their voice, I underline it. Oh, this element has to be included. That's important to them, you know. Yeah. And or here's the adjectives they use to describe it, and those adjectives have different meaning from these, and it guides me. Yeah. So it's not just like, if you ask them just to write out what they wanted, they might write a different thing. But if they're actually just talking about it and going off the cuff, you can pick up on those more subconscious cues and notes, and maybe kind of get to the root of what they want better than they could on their own. Yeah, you have nailed it exactly right. Because sometimes it is, you know, there's long emails back and forth, but usually that's after we first started. So I don't care where they are on the planet, I want to talk to them. So with all your inlay work, what do you have? Do you have a visual arts background? Did you? I mean, it sounds like you went straight into guitar making. So was there any apprentice or taking lessons with a
Any sort of visual artist?
Nope.
No?
Nope.
Wow.
Self-taught.
Yeah.
Self-taught drawing, self-taught engraving.
Crazy.
Because I didn't learn that. I mean, everybody learns to cut a bit of shell when you learn to make guitars. You know,
Yeah,
and I
that
could
makes
have
sense.
you doing it in 10 minutes, as I did, you know, from John. But his inlays were pretty simple back then. This happened well afterwards. And no, to art background, no. I always wish I did. And my sisters had some natural ability. They all painted, you know, amateur, but they painted. I never did, but there must have been something innate there, because I would start drawing and I think, oh, I don't know, how can I do this, that eye? How do I get the eye right? And when in my old shop where the dentist was in front, I'd go, and if the secretary wasn't busy, I'd say, can you just, for a minute, can you just lean down to the left and where the light is coming from? And I just want to see, oh, okay, that's what the eye is doing. Thanks, great. And then I'd run back and try and do it, and I think, that's why artists hire models.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
And so I would start hiring models. That's when I learned and just taught myself. But then, big jump, my wife, who was an educator, knew about a book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain.
I love that book.
Yes.
Such a great book.
Yes. It was new to me, but I worked my way halfway through that book.
Yeah.
And that was an eye-opener.
It really is.
Yeah, I'm glad you know about it. I've got at least 4 copies, you know, later editions and stuff. And when I teach inlay engraving, I borrow some of the early works. Exercises, thank you. And I use them. And that was a real eye-opener, and that I just jumped from there.
Yeah.
And then it's just doing. And the more you do it, you just get better at it, to the point where, you know, okay, I've got an image of this, but you know what? I need to turn them slightly, and I need that arm to be down here, not up here, and so I'll just draw it out, you know, and I find I can do that and you know, reliably. Or, as I say, I'll hire models, or if it's friends who are modeling for me, I go to their place, I bring my ladder, because I want to take a picture of them foreshortened. You know, I love doing that and pushing the envelope of what's been seen in inlay. Yeah. Not just the fact that through the millennia, I mean, you know, instruments have been inlaid. You know, in Egyptian tombs, they found inlaid instruments.
Oh, really?
So we're talking about thousands of years. Yeah, literally, tortoise shell, ivory, ebony. But even when they got more natural looking, it was still cartoonish and representational. You know, winged creatures and cherubs and leaves and things, and as opposed to the art world that went incredible realism. And okay, now the way of photography, we don't need to do that anymore. What else where can we go in art and make people feel things? Whereas in this world, it was always cartoonish, and I wanted to push it to a degree of realism, just because it made me happy.
Yeah.
That's all. I'm just satisfying my own urges. And so that's what I do. But even that could be taught. As I do, when I teach, I'll show people what I had to figure out by myself over 25 years. And, you know, in 3 or 4 days, I'll show them, here's how to accurately engrave a face, you know, and capture all the elements that make that person that person. And not that it's going to be perfect first time, but they'll all look like human beings, even though they don't all look like the person they're copying, you know? So I love changing the angles. I love foreshorten where people are looking up or things like that, because it also solves some things for me. You know, if I had to show you on a fretboard, you know, either, you know, vertical, get the whole U, or horizontal, and we've only got the shoulders and the head, right, on the width of a fretboard. But if I can foreshorten you, if we're looking down on you from here, then we can see, you know, maybe your arms across you and top of your nose, and we can see your feet and your knees, and there's all of you there, but you only occupy this much of the fretboard now instead of this much.
Yeah.
So it leaves you room to do other things, never mind if it might suit the subject, that people are at different angles and stuff like that. Anyway, I love doing it also because people never did it in this medium. And then one of the key things for me is the narrative arc. Whenever possible. I like telling stories, and I don't want it to be just decoration. You know, some fancy stuff here, some fancy stuff there, some fancy stuff there. Yeah, and stick some things in the bridge wings, and away we go. You know, fine, done, takes skill, just doesn't turn my crank.
Yeah.
And let other people do it. And fair enough, you can love it and it can be beautiful. It just doesn't satisfy me. So I want the story told. And I search for some kind of narrative arc. Now with Simon's, it's a little different. We wanted to capture a woman who's passed away, but the arc is completed by her totem, which appears at the top and the bottom, you know, and then you can follow some action happening. So it's not as distinct a storyline as some others, like in this other one I showed you, where I built anime characters with Greek myths, but they're now interacting with each other and trying to prevent something, you know? Or when I can do what I want, which sometimes if I'm building a guitar for a show or something like that, for nobody that I'll just sell after, usually I get into social activist stuff, you know, the power of music, anti-war, you know, peace, anti-violence, stuff that is important to me. I will do when I can. You might know, you know, the organization Doctors Without Borders. It began as Médecins Sans Frontières, and I'm a real supporter, a regular monthly supporter. I believe strongly in what they do. They are so brave. They go into conflict zones, and some of them are killed, but they still do it. They're in Ukraine. They're everywhere. They're in Pakistan helping with the floods. They're everywhere in the world. Anyway, so I built a guitar honoring them. The inlay was all about what they do. And when I sold it, I took about a third of it and just donated a lump to them. And then they put it in their newsletter to show other ways of support. I just love doing things like that. Or this one, I told you what was happening with this one that's supporting this Canadian organization called Arts Can Circle that takes music and musicians and musical equipment up into the most remote indigenous communities in the country, in the wilderness of the north. And this guitar, some of the money is going to be used to bring an indigenous kid down to study guitar making and take it back to his community and start something.
That's
you know,
amazing.
This stuff really turns my crank. And Linda Manzer, who's a dear friend, but we're mutual admiration here. You know, she does amazing stuff, and she just built this guitar that's being sold to raise money for Ukraine. And this guitar is traveling around the U.S. at the moment. Famous people are signing the guitar, signing the case, and it'll eventually, well, people are donating, but then eventually will also be sold and added to the collection.
Oh, that's
so,
great.
and you know, Linda and I talk about doing stuff like this all the time. Just like even this show, the you see, what's here? The T-shirt from this exhibit. That was Linda Manzer's idea that happened at a major gallery here a few years ago.
Cool.
That was all of us who learned from John Larrivee while he was in Toronto at different years, but all roughly in the early 70s. There were 6 of us plus John, 7, and there's the group of 7, which is the most famous art group in Canada. You know, early 20th century. It was her idea, why don't we each interpret one of those artists? There's 7 of us. We're just like them. We're collegial. We're friends. We help each other. You know, we socialize. You know, we go out to movies together. We eat dinner together. We're having problems. We call each other up. We buy wood and lacquer together. You know, just like them. They all associated and would go painting en plein air together in the provincial parks and stuff. Anyway, we thought, great idea. Let's present it to some of the major art institutions, see who'll go for it. The first one we went to, because they were known to be leaders in Group of 7 art, we thought, if they don't like it, we'll move on. And they did. And they financed it. They commissioned these guitars from us and had an exhibit which became one of the most successful exhibits they've ever put on. This institution that's like 55 years old, major. And they extended the show an extra 5 months, and then they took it to England, all these guitars, and they own the guitars.
Wow.
And they had performances all through the run of 11 months where they would bring the builder, a player, and an interviewer on stage live. And they talk about their relationship, and then, you know, mine, I made a flamenco for the show just to be different. And Jesse Cook played mine. He already had been playing one of my guitars for a long time, so it made sense. He isn't now. He's moved on to a Spanish builder, the bum. But he did. Mine was his main axe for about 16 years until he beat it all to shit, I think. You know? Although he does still own two of my guitars. But anyway, Jesse came and played for me. Even those every one of these, there were 7 of them, 7 guitars, all sellouts, which has never happened when they do music programming or other, things to bring people into the gallery. So it was so successful for them. Anyway, even though, and a film was made on it too.
Yeah. I mean, that's such an unusual project.
Yeah.
So,
that was Linda's idea.
That's
Linda's
that's
concept.
Yeah.
And it was still a highlight for all of us, you know.
You're such a great storyteller. I love getting all these backstories and seeing how everybody's connected and just seeing sort of the interweaving of everybody's storylines, because it's the more I talk to more luthiers, the more that's the case. Like you're all such a tightly knit group of folks.
Yeah.
So.
And there's a real collegiality here, especially in North America, amongst all the luthiers, even though technically we're all competing with each other. Technically.
But you would never guess that.
No.
You guys talk about each other.
Yeah, we're small producers. It's not like we're Taylor or Martin or Gibson or Larrivee, that need to sell, tens of thousands every month or whatever. Anybody who calls, if they have a problem, I'm happy to tell them anything they need. Here's how I do this. No problem. There's no secrets.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I certainly personally feel there's no reason to have secrets or, I'm not going to tell you because I figured this out myself. You're going to have to figure it out, take all the, it took me years, because here's what I know. Stradivarius made violins right up till pretty much near his death, and he died at age 93. And during that time, and by the way, his best instruments are considered from his 60s and 70s. That's his prime period. Anyway, he had a nephew and an uncle work with him, right in his workshop, following his instructions. When he died, they carried on and built. Their instruments were never considered as good. Even though they're seeing him, they're this close to him as you and I, they're doing how he instructs, they're watching what he did, because there is something intuitive that you bring to all your decision making that you may not often even be conscious of. Sometimes some of it you are conscious of and you could convey, but there were some things he couldn't convey, and they couldn't make an instrument that good. So even if I trained somebody, their guitars, even though they're making to my design, they're going to sound a little different and feel a little different. And every builder is a little different, and everyone needs to find the players that are the ones looking for what you're producing.
Exactly.
And that's why, a player needs to go to a music store and play 10, 12, 15 guitars.
Yeah.
Or if what they're after is the Martin D18, they've got to play 10 of them at a few different stores to find the one that's really speaking to them. Even though the others, they may be good guitars, but it's not giving the sounds that they are looking to hear, because no two humans are the same.
Yeah.
Psychology and physiology all play a role. So that's why I know there's no worries about competition.
No.
Because you're going to be making something different that will appeal to the person who my guitars won't appeal to, and I know that.
Yeah.
Some people want the Martin sound. They don't want the Laskin sound, or they want the Taylor sound. They want something a little more percussive or whatever it might be. And this is a sidebar, but it just, in my head, while I think about it and get it on record, we are on record here, that, because I push the envelope with the inlay art, never mind the oddities, not as odd anymore as a bevel. Grit's the one who whacks bits off guitars. That's what they used to say at the beginning.
Not anymore.
Yeah, and the side ports, what's a hole doing there? I have to produce a superb sounding and playing instrument every time, or I will be dismissed in a minute. The last thing I can have people saying, Grit's guitars are beautiful, but put them on a wall. If you really want a good guitar to play, just get a Collins. I can't have people thinking like that. Even though some may, because they see all these pictures of the inlay, because it's always different, and it's in your face, right, with all the colors and everything.
But first and foremost, you're a musician, and so you're always looking out for the tone and the playability and the sound. And so, however much time you're going to spend on the inlay and on the visuals, the core part is the sound, and you're never going to lose sight of that.
Well, thank you. But I must, or my career's over.
Yeah.
And people who are ordering things sight unseen, trusting that I'll be able to deliver.
Yeah.
But I mean, and that's the thing. All makers have to pay attention to be consistent, which is what new builders don't quite understand. That it takes a decade at least, and at least 100 guitars before you're starting to have enough experience to make intelligent guesses, informed guesses.
Yeah, you sort of build up that intuition.
Yes,
through
of what this wood is likely to do in combination with this, with these dimensions, you know? And that's just doing, like anything else.
Yeah.
But consistency is the key for a small builder. It isn't like a manufacturer who always puts a bell curve of results. You know, you get some that are astonishingly amazing, some that are crap, and a whole bunch in the middle that are just good.
Yeah.
And that's why when you're buying a commercial guitar, you have to try a bunch of them and find one that's really speaking to you.
Yeah.
Whereas I have to deliver that every time, and you know, knock on wood, you know, my customers are all thankfully they seem blown away every time.
So how much do you spend time playing music these days? Are you said that you had a few gigs that you might do later this year with your band, which you've been playing with since you were 18.
That's right.
Which is incredible.
I know. And now, you know, families watch their kids grow up. Some of them become musicians. We're like family, you know, and that's why we still do it, because it's hard to say no. We just have fun together.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, 17 years old, I came to Toronto for the work in a recording studio that I said, and I heard about this music club called Fiddler's Green, and they said, oh, if you call and book a spot, anybody can go to a guest set of three songs, or 15 minutes, whichever came first, right? Okay, so I did, and the guy who ran the club kind of liked it, because at that time I was getting into American traditional music, and I was learning the banjo from Pete Seeger's book, and I was learning dulcimer, and I played guitar, and I'm learning traditional American tunes, and he heard me play more than just guitar, and I played a song I wrote that was a funny one, and he loved it. I had a sense of humor and everything. Why don't you come back and do a gig, right? So I did a gig, and then he said, you know, a bunch of us have been getting together and playing, and we could use somebody who plays guitar. Do you want to come along to one of these rehearsals? Oh, sure, okay. And it turns out a club in Ann Arbor, Michigan that's still running, the Arc in Ann Arbor.
I've been there.
You've been there,
Yeah.
okay. Well, our band, the Arc, Dave and Linda, who started the Arc, Dave and Linda Siglin, their daughter, Anya, now does the booking, but at the time, she was just a little nothing. They knew about Fiddler's Green, and they said, hey, why don't we send some of our floor singers up, and you send some of yours down, and we just do a trade, you know, one weekend. Okay, so a bunch of us went down. Well, we were just a bunch of singers. And, well, who are we? Well, we're the friends of our club. We're the friends of Fiddler's Green. So, okay, and it was a format just like a songwriter's circle or something, and we'd each do a song, and then we'd move on. And then, got back home, we thought, well, why don't we try a fiddle tune together? Let's play a tune, instrumental. Yeah. So we tried one tune, and I went, oh, hey, that was kind of fun. And then, well, maybe we could play on each other's songs, you know. Let me try some mandolin on your tune, you know. And it just we became a loose but cohesive band. And it's still the structure. There's the main singers, but we rehearse, and we do proper arrangements of instrumental tunes, and we accompany each other, and now we practice, you know. But we may rehearse a bunch of stuff, but on the stage, in the moment, people may choose to do different numbers. Yeah. Because the mood is different from what they were planning. And, you know, this song would suit it better after that one that just happened. And then, oh, okay. Oh, you're in G, eh? Right. So pick up my mandolin and just listen. Oh, how's the melody of the verse? Okay. And then you start playing. Yeah. And that just happens on stage all the time. Yeah. Or people tell jokes. One of our band members is a Scottish guy, is really good at telling jokes. Great sense of timing. And he always has new ones, and we've never heard him, and we're cracking up on stage, and we're entertaining ourselves, because we're just having fun. Anyway, and we've retained the name, the Friends of Fiddler's Green. But that's how it started, and we just didn't have the heart to change the name. That's so even though horrible. It's a wacky kind of name.
No, I think that's great. That's such a great legacy and such a great backstory. And that is like the folk tradition, like basically in a nutshell, right there. Yeah. Just loose, collaborative, a lot of off the cuff stuff, but there's a consistent structure that everybody kind of understands. Yeah. You know the keys, you know the chord progressions to work with. So even if you don't know the song, you're still prepared.
Or you basically know people's repertoire and where they're coming from. Yeah. So the others are mostly Brits, so that got me into British traditional music. And I started, took up the concertina. I was teaching myself the Northumbrian small pipes.
I noticed that, and I heard that on one of your albums, and I was like, oh, I wonder if he's got a bandmate who plays them, but that's you.
That's me.
Awesome.
Yeah. And mandolin, of course. Oh yeah, and I play a little bit of fiddle, but I play at the fiddle because I'm a mandolin player. But I never got to the point I've set it aside because I never got to the point where I could do vibrato this way. And without it, slower tunes or accompaniments just didn't sound as good. Whereas on guitar, it's no problem, but somehow I just didn't have the patience to work my muscles for that move.
Yeah.
Even though I was getting into the bowing, you know, so I can play in a pinch, but I don't really play. And also, the mando I play is a bigger scale. It's one of the octave things that I
was wondering if that was an octave.
Yeah.
So you built that one.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, awesome.
And it's actually 5 courses.
Oh, okay, so considering.
It's an octave low, but with an extra high string.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Because it's got the scale length is from a tenor banjo, standard tenor, not a plectrum, but a standard tenor. And it means the 5th fret is perfectly played with the pinky. Whereas on a normal mandolin, there isn't room for that. You're playing it with your 4th. So it took me a couple of weeks to get the pinky going, but now I'm used to that stretch. And I wanted it, I didn't want the big, you know, what was coming out of the British folk scene, these big bazooki length necks, and they were taking citterns and tuning them differently. Big scales. They sounded better and more powerful, but I wasn't doing it for accompaniments. I was doing it for the tune playing. And it's too big a stretch for the tune playing. So I wanted something I could deal with, but that would sound a little richer. So then I realized, you know, if I add a 5th course and make it the high string, that means since I don't have the pinky available, you know, on a mandolin you can bounce up for the next tone, or on the fiddle you can reach with the pinky for another 2 more frets and get another tone. Well, I'm already using the pinky, it's not available. But if I add a high string, that means I can get 2.5 tones higher without leaving first position by staying within the 5th fret but moving to the high string. So that's why I did it.
Oh, cool.
And yet, but I've got the low G if needed, or sometimes if I'm playing in other keys, I make them drones and stuff, you know. But that's, I made it. And I just started trying to find a model that works for me, for the music I wanted to play. And every once in a while, friends would say, oh, would you make me one?
I was wondering if you
But I don't advertise it, because I don't really want to make them.
I see.
You know, and now when I make them, they're little guitar shapes, mini guitar shapes.
I see. So you're not doing like the...
No, I used to at the beginning, the teardrop thing, but then it was Katie Lang who wanted one, and she saw in an old Sears Roebuck catalog, you know, those little old guitar shapes, and she loves that shape. So from the catalog, I kind of drew it out, but made it within, you know, Mando size kind of thing, and that's what I've been doing ever since. But they don't interest me so much. I have what makes me happy to play.
Yeah.
I'm not a mandolin maker, and I also tell people, you know, I now put a pin bridge on it because that gives it a little meatier sound than a tailpiece when it's a flat top. And I said, I won't make a normal mandolin because I'm not prepared to carve the top. And that's the only way to get a nice, solid, meaty sound off mandolin. Anyway, so so I play that, and I'm still rooted in the British stuff. Yeah. But I love traditional music, period. And that started when my older sister left home first to go to university and left behind some of her albums. And I started playing them, and one of them was the Weavers at Carnegie Hall 1955 concert. I taught myself every song on that record. And she also left behind Pete Seeger, We Shall Overcome, a live record. And these things totally moved me. Yeah. And, you know, everybody still admires Pete and what he did for the music scene here. He even recorded one of my songs. Oh, really? And performed with it for a while, Very cool. A takeoff on sexual symbolism in traditional song. And this one's all about photography. Interesting. Called The Photographers, that I do on concertina. I've got to look this up. And, but it was published in a folk magazine at some point, and I think his wife Toshi saw it and said, oh, Pete, you need to sing this. This is fun. You know, do this one. And he called me early on. It was in my first shop. I could still picture it. I got a phone call, and I thought it was my friend faking me out. I said, Tam, I'm busy. I'm working. No, this is Pete. And then oh, you're right. That is the sound of his voice. Oh, no, my God, Pete Seeger. Oh, my God. Anyway, he's telling me he wanted permission to record and perform the song. Of course, like, what am I going to say? Yeah, and, no to Pete Seeger. Yeah. And then, of course, but most of the phone call was telling me all about what he was doing to clean up the Hudson River. And I really should do that for Lake Ontario. Sure, anytime, you know, coming right up. Anyway, but he did record it. And I joke that from just that recording, the royalties from that single recording paid for my electric bill for an entire month. That's it. Welcome to folk music.
Yeah.
You know? This is not pop music. You know?
Yeah, you don't go into it to make money. You go into it for the community.
That's right. You know, and I still love it. And he'd write me letters from time to time when he'd see an article about me in a magazine or something, you know. And but he wrote to lots of people, you know. And then Peggy became a friend of ours, you know, when my wife and I were running an adult music camp for about 35 years.
Oh, wow. Man, you've done
we did
all
a
the
lot
cool
of things.
stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's where the Order of Canada comes from. You know, that is our highest civilian award in this country, and you have to be excellent and innovative in your field, but also have done more things that benefit the country in general.
Right.
So starting the National Folk Music Awards, which are still running 17 years later, CFMA juried folk awards, that now even Folk Alliance is copying us, and they begged me to tell them some of the ways we structure it and do the juries. You know, Borealis Records for 25 years, you know.
Is it still going under some?
We've sold it to our distributor partner, True North Records, which was Bruce Coburn's, well, still is his label, started by his manager, Bernie, way back in the Yorkville days, in the early days of music, when there were no independent albums.
Yeah.
And anyway, we'd been distributing with True North for about 13 years, and we found we got, you know, better distribution because we tied our our rosters together.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And whereas, you know, they got into some folky stuff that we had already gotten into from going over to the Me-Dem show year after year after year and meeting with people. But that was only a year and a half ago.
Okay.
25 years I gave it, and it was a labor of love. Never earned a penny from it. In fact, its money went the opposite way. Welcome to folk music.
Yeah.
When things were tight, kept things going. We had staff, we had an office, we had a roster of almost 70 acts.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
More than 230 releases. And we were putting out traditional music that we knew may not even make its money back, but we've got some other bigger sellers, you know, that will do the job and will compensate, or, you know, Grit would throw cash in as needed. And, you know, that's the way it was.
Yeah.
And we accepted that.
That's amazing, though. I mean, unfortunately, that's just kind of the way some arts are, but that doesn't mean things shouldn't be given a voice or a platform, so it's
absolutely. We felt this is important,
that.
Music. And we would look across the country, all regions, all styles, everything under the huge folk/roots umbrella, which incorporates so many different genres, from rootsy country to blues to world music to you know, even some early jazz standards, to songwriters, to traditional fiddlers and accordion players, and you name it, right? And mountain music and regional music here, especially out east, you know, and Quebec traditional music has its own unique thing, and there's so many different things, or Métis, indigenous / Celtic music from out west.
From out there.
Absolutely, you know, and so we were looking at all this stuff all the time.
That's really cool.
And feel very gratified, and then when we made sure all the contracts were secure with everybody who was willing to move over when we sold the label to our distributor partner. But it's not like, you know, establishing a new bit of software and selling it to Google for 50 million, you know. No. All we got is enough cash. Eventually it'll be paid out to clear off the debts. That's it.
Wow.
But we feel that's good. We're going to get out clean. And we made sure all our artists were secure. All their contracts were honored the way they were. So basically our distribution partner, who we worked with for 13 years and knew him well, he just took over the contracts.
Okay.
But honors everything. And then when the contracts naturally end, it's up to the artist, and then if they want to carry on the relationship or whatever, that's their business after that. But they thanked us for not just doing what have been done through history. We're shutting the label down.
Yeah,
bye.
sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I know we owe you royalties, but we don't have any money. Too bad. You know, no. Everybody, always, royalties were paid. Staff was paid, you know, and we're worried about everything else. And we made up the difference by grants or tax credits, anything we could. Yeah. You know?
Wow, that's fabulous.
Yeah. So that was Borealis Records. And even that got started because I used to be on Stan Rogers' label.
Oh,
he
really?
was recording me. I was the first person he recorded aside from himself.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And then it had expanded to a few other acts, including my band, the Friends of Fiddler's Green.
Yeah.
But then he died. And his wife, you know, she wasn't running the label, but she felt obligated to keep her husband's music out there. So she carried that, but she divested herself of all the other artists. The 3 or 4 acts were on the label, including me, and I had just recorded my next album. What do I do with it? And then I thought, okay, well, I could put it up myself. I could take out a line of credit and get it manufactured, you know? But why don't I get my friends together, and why don't we all throw some money in the pot that I was going to, and maybe do something bigger? So I did. You know, my other Paul Mills and Bill Garrett, who are musicians who worked at CBC and were producers there as well, and then the musician Ken Whiteley, really known up here, producer, multi-instrumentalist, blah, 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 had his own little label. I got them together and we talked for a year. How could we do this and try and be viable but be better for the artists? In other words, more money in their pocket, less in ours. So we did things like we never took publishing. The artists maintained it fully. They mostly licensed, so they maintained ownerships of their masters. So if when the contract was over, if they decided to leave, they'd take their masters with them. And that they knew that was our incentive to make them happy, so they'd stay or we'd have nothing to sell.
Yeah.
Which also meant when we tried to get extra investment to expand, bring some younger people into the label who could continue on when my partner was even older than me, you know, we're getting on. Because of our model, no investors were interested.
Oh my gosh.
Because they could see that it's 85% licensed, which means 85% of what you have to sell could walk away. As opposed to if you own the masters, you can sell them in some form indefinitely, you know, publishing, whatever. And so it wasn't viable. Whereas our distribution partner knew us, so we ended up sensibly talking to him. But that's also why the money could only be so much, you know? Because he knew the dynamic, but he also knew, well, he's got a good decade to continue selling this stuff until, and then maybe he could carry on and develop a new relationship with these artists, or many of them. So anyway, I forget where I was going with all that. See, I digress from my points, but I hope it's interesting.
Yeah, no,
anyway.
it's you really get a picture of just how community and collaboration minded you are. I mean, we didn't talk about it in the interview, but you told me when I first got here about your collaboration with your friends to establish this whole building co-op, essentially, and the way you guys all worked together and made something happen at a time when it would have otherwise been almost impossible to make something happen. Working with your community like that to support each other and to take yourself out of the equation a little bit and just to be giving back is, that's obviously, I'm just like lavishing praise on you at this point, but that's so amazing.
It's okay. Keep it going. I'm not complaining, but I appreciate, no, you got it.
Yeah.
You hear the message. And that is true, and it is important to me and my wife. We're both like that. And you know, but the ability of one person to change things, I learned that lesson very early. And it's just continued. Every time you see a gap, you know, well, we need something going on here. Well, instead of waiting for someone else to do it, why don't we just do it? You know, and that's really where it's coming from. I feel like epoxy. I'm filling gaps, you know. But when I was maybe 21, I was, you know, building, and I was often going down to customs, clearing shipments of materials, and I would say to the customs agent, you know, why is there 15% duty on this stuff? I can't buy this in Canada. Nobody makes this here. I'm bringing it in from the States or from Europe or wherever. And I said, why is there duties? What industry is it protecting?
Yeah.
And they said, well, we don't know, but you have to pay it. So then I'd say, can I speak to your supervisor? And I climbed my way up until I got to, you know, provincial. And I moved up. And when I got to federal politicians, the higher I got, the nicer people got. Until I got up to a federal level, that whatever minister was in charge of that area, and they said, oh, well, if you can tell us how you and your colleagues use this material, how much you use, what you do to it, you know, where it comes from, let me know. And we might be able to change things. So I did. And it took 2 years, but I put a tariff item on the books in Canada before free trade that for guitar and mandolin and banjo construction, all these materials were duty-free. And I'm talking about nuts and saddles, cases, strings, all kinds of parts, tuners, you know, machine heads, all these things that nobody was making them in Canada at the time.
There was no competition.
Yeah, so why was there duties? The point of a duty is to protect the local industry, you know? So he did. And that was on the book, 59825-1. Never forgotten. But that was a lesson. I'm in my early 20s, and look at that, what one person can do if you persevere. And I've applied that in so many situations. And you get in a habit. You know, now I'm reaching a point, I'm 69, and I'm thinking, you know what, I don't want to think those thoughts that much anymore, because I'm too busy, right? And I'm getting tired of doing everything all the time. I'd like a break, you know? So I'm trying not to get new ideas. Some have occurred to me, and I don't go there, Grit. You know, I give myself a lecture. You know, you're relishing a little more reasonable pace in your life at this point. You know. And one of the things I'm doing with it is I've always written. You know, I've got 4 books published and 1 novel from a long time, from a while ago. And a new kind of thriller. But I knew I had a storyline that would be unique. It's related to instruments that no one else could have possibly thought of. And they agree, and a lot of the comments are all saying, boy, he really knows his stuff about instruments and these characters and stuff, you know. and the agents who have been around a long time, they said, don't do any rewriting. It's a gem the way it is. We feel it's confident. It'll sell. And so I'm sort of researching the next one, which will probably be a character that'll reappear. But I've just enjoyed that. I've always done a bit of that. I think working with words, whether it's songwriting, you know, I was always a lyric-driven songwriter, not a groove-driven songwriter. That's the world I came from.
The ballads.
Exactly. Story. I was just about to say that. Story ballads. You know, that still appeal to me and grab my attention. Side anecdote on that subject. When I was a kid, the first record I bought with my own money was the Byrds' Fifth Dimension, and on it had 2 traditional ballads. It wrote public domain. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I remember one of them was a Broken Token ballad. You know, and for those who don't know about, you know, the girl and the boy separating, he's going off fortune hunting or to war or something, and she wants to be able to recognize him when he comes back in 7 years, so they break a coin or a ring in half so they can match up the halves when they come back, and she'll know it's him even if she doesn't recognize him. Called Broken Token ballads, right, in general, in American and British tradition especially. Could be in other traditions, I just don't know. There's one on this album called John Riley.
Oh, I love John Riley.
Yes.
It's a great song.
And I heard this song, and even at that, I don't know, I was 14. I'm going, what is this? I've never heard a song, such a powerful, moving story, and this melody that's so great. What is this stuff? That got me hooked on traditional music to this day.
Joan Baez's version of that song was one of the first ones where, because I'd heard some traditional music before that, like through, you know, Paul Simon covered a few things. But I think it was really with Joan where I was like, ooh, what are these? What is this song? What is this music? What is this tonality and this modality? And once I started finding more of those, you know, related albums, it was just down the wormhole.
Well, I can relate. Good for you. We're very much the same that way. Still have that love. I mean, I love all kinds of music, you know. I mean, Stephen Sondheim, I'm in love with his stuff, you know. You know, it's brilliant. And, you know, I like classical music, and, you know, I like all kinds of stuff, you know. If it moves me and makes me feel something, it's successful as a creative output. That's the way I judge it all. And even though my personal love is folk music and what it symbolizes on music that you can make, you can participate. It isn't just sitting and being a consumer of. You can make the music, you can add to it. And that's what it's about.
That's like I think one of the best parts about the folk community is that it gives people that power, which is so often easily, you know, people are just like, oh, I can't do that. It's too hard. And no, it makes it accessible.
Exactly. So, that's one of the reasons. Not the only, but one that I still love all that stuff.
Speaking more about your musical background, and I'm always curious to talk to luthiers about how what they play might impact what they build, because there's kind of an interesting split of there are some luthiers who are primarily fingerstyle players, and so they mostly build fingerstyle guitars. But then there are plenty of others who build fingerstyle guitars, but they're mostly into surf music or something totally unrelated. They're just sort of answering the demand, I guess. And so I guess for you, coming from the more folk-based background, but also building guitars that include flamenco guitars, classical guitars, things that go beyond just sort of maybe the kind of more humble mahogany kind of, you know, straightforward folk music guitars that people might kind of associate with that style. What got you into building those guitars? Was it just, again, the demand that people were kind of placing upon you, or?
Yeah, now that's interesting. All a little different. Obviously, I'm a steel string player, so I was coming, wanting to make a guitar that made me happy. Yeah. Of course, and I like the tone I'm producing is what I want, and I know it isn't everyone's taste. That's fine. It's got to have the basics, in terms of power and balance, things like that, and sustain. But its general tone, I don't like an edgy, hard-edged tone. I like a mature, rounder sweetness, and yet still clear. You must have clarity. So it's not mushy, but I just think of it as more mature somehow. And that makes me happy. Maybe it's coming from the fact that even in my own playing, sometimes I like doing melodic runs on the bass string as opposed to using them as accompaniment and playing the melody on the high string. I'll run the bass on the low A and E. And I love being able to do that. So I want clarity even down there, but I love that low roundness, So that's me. And classical guitars I always made, but I have to admit I stopped promoting myself in the classical world when I got tired of how many neurotic people there were in that scene, up here. Everybody's different, and different times could be different. I still make classicals, and this is one, I've got another one on order, but I don't push myself in the classical scene the way some people do. Right. More power to them, but that turned me off at that time. Yeah. And yet, flamencos, I wasn't building until a person who was the hub of Toronto's flamenco scene at the time. He was a player and a musical director of one of the dance companies and blah, blah, blah. He said, Grit, why don't you try it? I've had Edgar Munch, John's teacher, when he was here in Toronto, try it and came out like a flamenco-looking classical. And I had John try it, same thing, just sounded like a flamenco-looking classical. Said, give it a try, but read this stuff first, and let me talk to you. And anytime I get a good one in, I'll call you over and you come and look inside and measure. And he would do that. The first one I made came out so good, people were bidding on it. And that was, it was a traditional cypress back and sides, very traditional looking one. And I hadn't even tinted it at all. And he said, but the next one tinted a little bit. It looks like, an unfinished maple furniture to them. But it sounded so good. Literally 3 people were bidding on it. Wow. So he said, you're obviously doing something right, Grit. Keep going. Yeah. And I started doing it, and I fell in love with flamenco music, especially the traditional stuff. Not the stuff that's getting into jazz. I appreciate the ability that some people, the Paco de Lucias of the world, are doing, but it's the traditional stuff. Yeah, all those Semitic minor chords that just hook me in, Yeah. And as well as the fact that it's interpretive. It's a bit like jazz in a way, that these fast runs, it's just how they're feeling in the moment, But also the challenge of building a guitar that can meet that. Yeah. It's the toughest action to achieve because it's with nylon strings that need a bigger vibrating room, but it's an action that's as low as an electric guitar. Wow. So it will do some buzzing. There are certain buzz that is accepted. Interesting. But other buzzes that are not. Yeah. You have to get it to be perfect. And the bridge and saddle has to be within about 1 millimeter of total height. Or the golpe technique of hitting the top, they can't do it. You're too far away. Oh, okay. And that is part of the scene. And you're not only too far away, you're increasing the tensions. And with flamenco, because it's lower action, lower bridge, lower everything, I even grind the frets down so it's super low. The tension drops off. When the strings is against the top, the lower they come, the tension drops off dramatically. So the whole guitar is built lighter to be able to respond to this lower tension. At the same time, they hit it all the time. And they crack these braces. Like the braces stay glued, but they're split. And so often I glue them up, put a reinforcement bit of, lightweight cedar behind it, and send them back out to fight the lions. Yeah. That's what it felt like. But they loved it when things would crack and break, because then the instrument is suffering and it understands the music and where the music comes from, because it comes out of poverty in Spain. Yeah, that's where it came from. Yeah, it comes from that place of pain that so much music comes from. Exactly, and honest to God, they really truly feel the guitar sounds better after it's been through some of that. The most effective story, the same guy who got me into it, right? When he was still alive and he was heading to a gig, he was loading up his car and he's backing out of his driveway and he drives over his guitar that he forgot to put in the trunk.
Oh no.
So he goes, and this was a Ramirez flamenco, his old Ramirez that he loved, right? So he goes to a repair guy with a brown paper bag filled with bits. And the guy put the guitar together, and there's all these, joints like Frankenstein, where he just glued everything back, against each other to get the shape back. And my friend said, that guitar never sounded so good. It's like it relaxed it or something. He said it was fantastic.
Yeah, see, this is why people need to not be so picky about repair histories on vintage guitars.
Oh, yes. Oh, God, yeah. Tell them, that's the patina of use.
Exactly.
My God, if I was a violin maker and I tried to sell a guitar that isn't dirty and scratched up, a violin, forget it. No one would want it.
Yeah, the guitar community is so funny about that.
Yeah, I know.
It's like the opposite of every other.
Oh, I got a ding. Should I refinish?
Like, no, leave it.
Leave it, exactly. I said, you save the refinishing for a horrible accident. Because there's maybe one refinishing in a guitar.
Yeah.
Because I explained to them, every time you strip the finish off, you're going to have to sand the wood a bit. And you're getting too thin. You can maybe do it one time and be solid. But that's it. So really, just accept the use. And then when I see a guitar, a player's coming through town. And, hey, Grit, should I pop by for my 10,000 strum checkup or something? Sure, it'd be great to see you. And they're so proud. We open the case and look how perfect the guitar is, and it's been 11 years, and he or she, they're so proud of how perfect it is. And my only thought is, don't they like it? Don't they play it?
That's what I would
Where's the scratches? Where's the dings? What's wrong? That's what I think.
Yeah.
And then I see one that's all the finish is gone from the back, from the belt buckle, and his sweat and nails has pulled half the finish off the neck, and from a slashing with the pick, there's down to the raw wood, but the angle of the neck is perfect. The top arch is perfect. It sounds great.
Yeah.
I am a happy camper.
Yeah.
That's what you want.
Yeah. Welcome back for another episode of Presents here at the North American Guitar. I'm Lindsay, and today it is my honor to show off this incredible 50th anniversary mid-size guitar from Grit Laskin. Now, for folks who know Grit, he's well loved and highly sought after, not only for his beautiful guitars, but also for his incredible inlay work. And for folks who don't know him, you've likely experienced the influence that he's had on the guitar building world, because he's one of the co-originators of the top soundport, as well as the Laskin-style beveled armrest and beveled rip rest, 3 features that you might see on countless guitars now made by other luthiers. You were using a material on the rosette that I don't know if you had made it, but it was some sort of like artificial, it wasn't a natural shell or something like that. And so, are you still working with stuff like that?
I have a little bit of it. It's called Dichrolam.
Dichrolam,
Yep. And it was an invention of Chuck Erickson, the Duke of Pearl. And that was him trying to do something that wouldn't be the natural materials. For the manufacturers are getting so frustrated by all the environmental laws, and they're fed up with dealing with it. And the little people like me, we can deal one at a time or do whatever. But when they're making, they're shipping hundreds of guitars at a time to Europe or South America or whatever elsewhere in the U.S. or across a border and being stopped by customs because of this material or that. Anyway, so he tried to come up with something man-made, but the process was very expensive. And I got some sample sheets. Here's what it looks like in the raw. Here's what it looks like. Oh, get the dust off.
Wild. Yeah.
See? And underneath it's a substrate, and it's got a clear layer so you can inlay and sand through the clear, but you're not touching this, how this was created. And you see this sheet that was just, well, there's the length and there's the width. That's what it cost, just for that size of little piece.
Goodness.
Anyway, but this was one of the samples. So I got one sheet reddish green, reddish blue, and this one is blue green.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's any more.
Right. Oh.
But I used it. I've been using it when it suits certain things, and another way of making that guitar a little special.
Yeah.
You know, but it is expensive and rare stuff.
Yeah. Are you trying to find other materials like that, kind of on that vein of avoiding natural restricted products?
You know,
trying to avoid
I'm
that?
not in general, although I keep my eyes and ears
Yeah.
open in case there's anything interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it was I'm the one who basically turned the community on to recon stone. Reconstructed stone. You know, all the primary colors you're seeing, that's stone.
Okay.
And the knife industry knew it, carvers knew it, like sculptors knew it. And it was actually Larry Seifel from Pearlworks. He passed away, but he created the company Pearlworks that does inlay for the big manufacturers and stuff.
Yeah.
He's the one who figured out how to do inlay with CNC machines.
Oh.
He was the first one to do that and figure it out, how to tool up. Brilliant guy. Died too young, but a lovely, lovely guy. Anyway, sidebar, Larry Seifel and Chuck Erickson, who I mentioned earlier, they're the inventors of Abalam, laminated shell sheets of now 25 or 30 different species, but it began with abalone, so they called it Abalam, laminated abalone. And they came up with a way of slicing on the curve, the gentle curve of the shell. You know, the shell's only about that big. I'm just showing the camera, right? An abalone shell. And normally, you know, you'd cut little chunks that were about this big square. Sorry, I'm thinking of the camera. I'm saying to you, about that big square.
Yeah.
You'd flatten one side and then slice.
Yeah.
And that's the normal piece of shell that you'd get. But they found a way of cutting on the curve, cutting thin, curved pieces, so thin that even though it's a hard material, it would flex and flatten.
Okay.
And then they could layer them and build up sheets. Hold on. Stay where you are.
Oh, cool.
There's a sheet of donkey shell. And you can see how it's been layered up. This particular one, they cut it in that way.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's your squarer pieces, and there's the bottom. Anyway, they've made it like this, so now you can do continuous things.
Yeah.
Instead of in the old days, you would have to butt hard-edged pieces of shell together.
Yeah.
And now, every guitar that you see that has abalone around the edges, that's all cut from Abalam, where they will, you know, put in a computer program your shape, and then from this one sheet they could do this much, and you could do an entire guitar with 5 pieces. And instead of the traditional of putting shell in, which is inch-long pieces, and you just put them in and you break them around the curve as you go. And that, you know, it revolutionized it, but it also meant people like me, I can do things where backgrounds and materials and figures could be longer because of that, as well as reconstructed stone. Now for the camera, I'll lift a piece. Let's say, here's a piece of malachite.
Cool.
Okay, and you're seeing the table saw that sliced this from a bigger block, and that's about as thin as they'll do, about 1/8 of an inch, and then I grind it down on my thickness sander with heavy grits and bring it down closer to the thickness of other shell. But this is recon stone, reconstructed stone.
So is it just like pulverized and then...
Precisely.
Oh, wow, that's really cool.
She's one smart cookie, I'll tell you. You're ahead of me on this. Okay. They pulverize the natural ore and reassemble it in a vacuum with a resin like epoxy to hold it together.
Yeah.
It's still 85% the original stone, but they've broken the molecular structure so that now it's not rock.
Yeah.
You can cut it and file it, and it's kind of got the hardness and brittleness like bone or ivory.
Oh, very interesting.
And you know, you can see this. I don't know how people can see at home. There's a few, all different flavors. You know, I call them different stones, different colors. For example, this is clear turquoise that I'm often using for the sky.
Yeah, so that's real turquoise.
That's real turquoise. or lapis lazuli, right?
Yeah.
You can see little bits inside.
Yeah.
And anyway, so it was Larry Seifel who saw a bit of the green malachite. He got a little piece. He said, I found this at a craft show, and it was just sitting there. This might make interesting inlay, So I found out that a knife supplier would sell it and would cut it for you, whatever size you need, or that's how they do it. And I used it on a guitar I made for Larry. And that's the first time it was used on guitar.
Oh.
And now so many people are using it because once you see it, your color palette has quadrupled in a minute. It's incredible. And different textures and different grains, different grain patterns. They figure out how they can join it. Like this is onyx, but with grain. And you can get it with different grains or blended with other stones so it looks different.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever texture you need or color that fits the subject. In addition to all the different flavors of shell, there's at least 9 different species of shell that I'll use, and the legal ivory I was showing you earlier, walrus ivory, that's legal. But anyway, it was Larry and Chuck that invented the laminate. Sorry, I'm pointing at where I put the laminate down for people in the camera. And then, and it was Chuck again who came up with this concept, and Larry who turned me on to Recon Stone. So those two guys, I'll tell you, hugely influential. And now the people, Mazecraft in, where are they? Connecticut. That's where I buy it.
Okay.
They're this knife material building supply. So if you go to a craft show and you see a handmade knife and the handle is beautiful turquoise, that's Recon.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and who knew? They've been using this so that it's workable now.
Yeah.
And yet it's still the stone.
Yeah.
So that means I can get colors on the fretboard, whereas I used to have to use harder maples and I'd stain them. A wood that would take a stain, but it's still not as hard as the ebony. And I'm thinking of wear. At least shell and stone is going to withstand the wear at least as good as the ebony.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you're thinking the practical side too. The other reason I like about the Recon stone is it's still technically the natural material.
Yeah, that's true.
They've just broken its structure.
Yeah, so it's not something that you need to worry about overfishing or like losing species. It's just stone, and it still has that natural element, those natural colors that occur in nature. So.
Exactly, yeah. And speaking of that, even the abalone that we use in the guitar world, it's actually not the abalone that's controlled.
Yeah, I just learned that there are different species.
Oh, yeah. And the one that's literally on the CITES list is not the one we generally use.
Yeah.
However, customs people,
they don't always know.
They don't know that. They'll just get worried.
I read the Fretboard Journal article, and I was like, oh man, there's a lot to worry about here, guys.
Yeah, and our worry is customs people think, oh God, there was something about this, we're supposed to control this.
Back of their mind.
I don't want a letter in my file. I better just send it to Fish and Wildlife, so it's not my problem. That's our worry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On a similar sort of note to the to using alternative materials, but going more to tone woods, I know you kind of mentioned earlier that you've been gravitating towards ebonies, sort of as an alternative to Brazilian. And what are your reasons for going towards ebony?
Yeah, really, it's just the sound.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all workable.
Yeah.
And they're beautiful to look at. Many of the species, there are quite a variety of things called exotic ebonies these days. But it's really looking for alternate materials that will sound good. And you're right. I've still got a bit of Brazilian, but the last few sets are committed, and I haven't bought any new stuff for a while. Actually, even the stuff that I do see, if you're willing to pay what people are charging, it's stuff that to me we would have called packing material in the early days. It's technically Brazilian, but it's
Yeah, might as well use something else.
Yeah, exactly. And really, the thing people need to understand, when guitar makers were in the 18th and 19th century, were building guitars using the soft sycamore, the flamed maple, European flamed maple, that was used in the bowed instrument world. They were making guitars out of them, like even Stradivarius. There's at least 5 guitars in existence of from Strad, and they're all made with the flamed maple, right? And that's what people are using. And then they thought, why don't we try something that looks prettier? And Brazilian rosewood, it was the rosewood of commerce for centuries because it's so beautiful. And this was the lumber that was available in their corner lumber yard. It was being used for everything. Desks, furniture bases, railroad ties. Honest to God, in South Africa, there are railroads, and all the ties are Brazilian rosewood. Don't even worry about it, because they're so soaked of creosote now, they're useless.
Wow.
But it was ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Because there was lots of it, big trees, and it was gorgeous wood. And that's its problem. It was just overused and not replanted. It's not the modern climate change.
No.
Or even, rainforest clearing. That's adding to the problem now.
Yeah,
but that wasn't its original problem.
Far.
Yeah. And anyway, so they just picked this wood, and they happened to land on something that had a specific gravity that did respond exceptionally well. And it surprised them. So they stuck with it, because this was so much better than what they were using. So it became the standard just because it was the most convenient and it was pretty stuff. Not because somebody tried every wood they could and this one did it better than anything else. So people have to understand that's where it came from, and it was the standard wood until they couldn't get it anymore. And then they went to the next rosewood that was as close in specific gravity, and that is the summation of all its properties, its weight and strength to mass ratios and all this stuff. Indian rosewood was the closest and plentiful, because it was the standard tree of shading the tea plantations in India. So they were constantly growing it, and relatively fast growing. Anyway, it was great. That was the solution, and that's when the world went to Indian rosewood. But it's Brazilian only because they stumbled on it and it sounded good. It doesn't mean it's the best wood out there.
Yeah, exactly.
But people think it is because it was the standard and that's what they knew. It's kind of like, excuse me, but I'm going to go on record here, Pre-war Martins were particularly good, or in between the wars, because they were building them too light. And they found they were being swamped with repairs. So in the early 50s, they started going heavier. Right? And that's why people want them, because they were built so light they were more responsive, but also delicate. And then during the war, when they were having problems getting Sitka spruce, well, they started looking to local lumber yards. So, there's this, in the Adirondacks, there's a species, why don't we try that stuff? And so they were using it. But again, they were still building the guitars lightly. It's not that Adirondack spruce made better guitars. It was the only spruce they could get, and they were putting on guitars that they were building so light they were extra responsive. But what happens nowadays? People think Adirondack equals better guitars. So people want it. And most of the stuff I see, I've got a few sets, and I did use one set recently, but only if I'm nagged into it. Said mostly the Adirondack I've seen looks like crap. Looks like stuff that you wouldn't put on a cheap guitar, and yet people use it because it's technically Adirondack. So there's all these things around guitars that it doesn't mean they're going to make better guitars.
Absolutely.
It just means it seems to be an association, so people take 2 and 2 and it goes to 5, and they want 5. So you have to think about that. And the way I tell people, I used to use German spruce exclusively for the first decade of my building, until I found I was having trouble getting as good a quality as I wanted, even buying from Europe and everything. And I still use it occasionally, people nag, but then I found I could get higher quality Sitka. Easier. And I could get good quality. I liked that it wasn't as white. It was a little muted tone color, a little beigeier, and I loved the sound. So it became my standard, and to this day, I can get superb quality stuff. For example, I buy from someone who supplies guitar tops to a lot of the manufacturers from Washington State. Right? And I've been there, and I know that they have a little stack in the office. Even though they cut 1,000 tops a week at least, maybe even a day, they go and search for blowdowns in the rainforest and bring out the chunks, and they cut just like all kinds of people buy from them. Taylor, everybody is buying from them. But they set aside the most supreme, beautiful tops in the office, and they have a little stack. And I know about that stack, and I buy from that stack.
Just that one stack?
And I pay twice the price. but it's worth it. And even out of that, 20% I don't use. Because I don't feel it's quite up to scratch. And I'll sell it to an amateur builder or save it for parts or something. That's how picky I am, but I'm getting beautiful stuff. And I'm talking about as split, properly, no runoff, as well as can be done, quartered, color, grain. I don't like grain super tight. I don't like it too wide. Like everybody else, we've all got our flavors and know what works on our guitars. But the other thing people have to understand is that one rule that works for you may not apply to the same degree to the next builder. You can't say, oh, when you put a cedar top on, this is what you're going to get. You might, but it could be different from this builder to that builder. So you have to take it with a grain of salt and talk to each builder. What happens when you use that wood, or what have you noticed? And so I tell people, remember all these magazines, they've got to fill up their editorial content. So there's going to be another article about woods or this or that or setup on guitars,
I feel like the tone wood conversation is so interesting to me right now because, first getting really immersed into this whole world, it's, okay, I got to try to learn all these woods and learn the general characteristics to, when people ask, I have some sort of quick and easy answer. But the more I talk to you guys, the more I realize there is no quick and easy answer. There are generalities, and I don't want TNAG to be contributing to the sort of fetishization of, well, I must have this tone wood, because no, ask the luthier, tell the luthier what you want musically, and then see what they think is the best option, see what they have that they think is the best option that's going to work for your particular taste, because there's so much variation.
There is. I mean, that's wise advice, and I say that to people as often as you can, for sure. But I also understand in this day and age, because people are seeing use of all kinds of exotic woods, and incredible looking guitars all over the place. So they're, oh boy, maybe I could get some of that.
The brain lights up.
So they're looking at all kinds of stuff, my own guitar that I played, that I've had since 2004, the last one I made for myself, just Indian. Sitka top that wasn't even anything special. It's probably a top that I wouldn't use for one of my orders, because it had a little flaw or something. But use it. I love that guitar. It sounds fantastic. Now I've been playing it for a bunch of years. It's 18 years old, and boy, I've been warming up for these gigs that are coming up in a couple of weeks, and just strumming on it, going, whoa. Boy, do I love the sound of this guitar. And it's just Indian rosewood and nothing special. And I want to do that because sometimes it's the only guitar finished one I have to show, because when they're made, they're gone. Usually, right? And somebody visiting me, if you come this week, you might catch this guitar. I'm supposed to be shipping on Tuesday, but if you come on Monday, so they could try something. But normally it's the only one, so I don't want them to see only Brazilian rosewood and European spruce, because that's what they're going to want. And I don't want them to want that.
You kind of have to set that precedent yourself a little bit.
But it just shows you, Now that doesn't mean normally I'm comparing the sound right out of the gate, because that's how I hear every guitar at exactly the same moment of first being strung, first being vibrated, and so that's my comparison point. And so it's interesting to hear these days, like Brazilian, many of the ebonies and a few other species, wenge, great sound from wenge. I made a steel string that blew me away, and now I've got an order of a classical for it too, because I'm looking forward to hearing what that does. Not exciting to look at, but boy, does it vibrate well. Or Ziracote.
Oh, I love it.
That's another favorite that sounds good. A little anecdote about that. First time I was using the wood, I was making a guitar that was going to belong to one of our major national museums. When I got a craft award, a national craft award years ago, part of the deal, you got some money, and you got a commission that it belonged to the collection of one of our major museums.
Oh, cool.
No matter what discipline you were in, glass blowing, pottery, whatever it is, they would own one of your pieces. So I thought, let's do something special. So I made it out of Ziracote. And when it's just the frame, there's one point where I clamp it in this, and the reinforcement blocks I put in for the bevels, I glue them in square so I can clamp well, but then I bevel it down. I remove it. I bevel it on the inside, so it's like that, and now it's square. Oh, sorry. Hello, camera. So I bevel it on the inside, and then where it's square on the outside, I then cut into it, so it's beveled from the outside.
Okay.
And you get this thing that's only a half a centimeter thick, but it follows your curve. All right? So I grind it down to do it, and I clamp it in this clamp here, and I'm kind of leaning in the frame and grinding away at it, and the phone rings. I go over to the phone, pick it up, dial tone, there's nobody there. That's weird, I guess I hung up. Go back to my grinding, I hear the ringing. Back to the phone, you can see where it's going, right? Nobody there. And then I realize the frame was ringing from the vibration of my tool. That's how responsive it was to vibration.
That's crazy.
Literally, because I'm like that. If you imagine the guitar frame and I'm going like this and my head is right in the frame, and literally, I mean, there's no back and top on it yet, just so people understand. I've never experienced anything like that. I remember standing there basically in awe. Holy, what on earth? Wow. So I became a fan of Zero Cote ever since I used it. So that's been an alternate for a long time, especially when people are talking about Brazilian or something. Well, no, let me talk you into something that's not going to give you a customs hassle.
Yeah.
You know?
But still give you all the tone that you want. Kind of digging more into the ergonomic features. You came up with you helped develop the bevel. Well, you did essentially. You did it sort of while working with a client.
That's right.
So yeah. And same thing with the soundport.
Yep.
That was another client feedback thing. Is there anything else that that you do in terms of the construction that is unusual or kind of unique to you?
I think so. Let's see. Well, first of all, my shapes are my own. They're not copies of Martin shapes like many people do, or Gibson shapes and stuff. They're my own. The rosette, continuing sort of a semi-classical approach with the mosaic in the center, but I add abalone shell, to make it a little more steel stringy, but still, I like the rosette. I love the idea of it there, even on steel strings, but I really got that from John Hervé.
Yeah.
Because he started as a classical builder and a classical player. That's all he knew. And Edgar Munch's teacher was only a classical builder. In fact, sidebar, I walked into John's shop the first time I came, and he was putting position dots on the fretboard of his first steel string, and he had 3 of them in the wrong position because he was sticking them where he thought they looked pretty. He didn't know they were to mark certain positions because he'd never even heard of Martin.
Wow, that's
He'd never
crazy.
heard of Martin guitars. No, he was just a classical player, studying classical guitar, not being able to afford a good one and wanted a good one, and he accidentally stumbled upon this maker who had been brought to Canada for 5 years to work under contract for a music store. And the guy said, well, if you're interested, come at night, I show you, after your work. And he did, and that got John hooked. So anyway, that's where he's coming from. So there's that. Probably another thing I've been doing lately as an option is just an oil finish on the neck.
Oh, yeah.
Like I did for the 50th, I think. Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, and because there isn't the lacquer, there's no drag.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a process. It's a version of what's done on bowed instruments where there's no finish on the center of the neck that you hold. And so you can squeeze for a bar chord. And nothing's going to hold you, but if you a full polish lacquer finish until you've got 3, 4, 5 years of wearing your sweat acids on it, there's going to be some grip if you squeeze tight and try and move. So you end up learning just to loosen your grip and you move. But if you do an oil finish, it's like silk.
Yeah.
You can't. There's no drag. And I call it my fast neck.
Yeah.
And I'll do that on occasion. And one of those 2 that are up there is going to have it. Yeah. And so that's an option. I didn't invent that, but I don't know of anybody else who's doing it regularly. Or another thing, when I do, the inlay art, of course, for years I was doing on the headstock, was doing a full normal finish. But of course then you immediately tighten the washers on the machine heads and the washer that's there, and you tighten the nut, and you're pressing on the finish, and you would get this little crease line around, or as the wood underneath expanded and contracted, but the shell and stone materials don't. So you would get this tiny little white line, which is a loss of adhesion at that spot. And it would drive me nuts. After all this time I spent on all this work, and now the finish is making it look crappy. So how about this? Why don't I just do a bit of sealer, and that's it, and leave it matte. So that's all I do now. I do 3 coats of a vinyl sealer, let it dry, and then I lightly scuff sand it, and then steel wool it. So it's matte, but it's protected.
Yeah.
And you can look, my guitar has it, and it's now 18 years old. There's no crease lines of any kind. And I've played folk festivals in the heat, you know, and traveled in the winter with it, and it's moved. Now, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so, and at first I thought, oh my God, will anybody be okay with this? It's so different, you know. But I just did it, and nobody even cared or noticed.
Yeah.
Typical.
Just made your life easier.
There's things like that. Another thing that I do that you can't see is I play with the top thicknesses. Now, you can see evidence, for example, not on that one as much, but on this one, you can see some of my plane mark from hand plane marks.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas this is, you're seeing, and sorry, you can't see it on screen, but I'm showing heavy sand marks from the thickness sander when I'm rough sanding it, because I don't sand the top until filler has happened.
Okay.
And all the messy stages done on the back and sides, then the last thing I do is sand the top. So you're still seeing evidence of me thicknessing, and there was more of it where I thinned around borders. So I do something, if you can stand a story about it, where this comes from. There's a rule of thumb that was coming out of the classical guitar building thing, that the treble side you leave thicker because of the higher, the tighter vibrations, the wavelengths, and the bass side you leave thinner to be more flexible for the bigger wavelengths. That's, you know, just the theory, right? There's no proof, right? But that was the accepted wisdom. Okay, so myself and Sergei de Young decided, let's test that out. Let's each make a pair of classical, spruce top, cedar top, and you do spruce top, cedar top. And let's each do 4, actually. 2 pairs each. Do 2 of the 2 different woods, thickness the way the traditional says, and do the other 2 thickness precisely the opposite. And 2 makers doing it, 2 different woods, 2 different batches. Consistently, for both of us, every time we did exactly the opposite of accepted wisdom, the guitars sounded better. Every time. And like, no secrets, you know? And I have lectured about this to luthiers. I say, do it. Find out what works for your guitars, the way you build them, your body shape, your air volume, the way you brace, you know? But this is what works for me, and it worked for Serge. Yeah. You know, and so we kind of broke the mold, and to this day, I play with those thicknesses. I haven't changed. Yeah. You know? Yeah. But nobody could see that. Yeah, you know? And it brings back, you know, you can imagine, you know, this poor guitar player just doesn't know a lot, and he's standing in a music store, and that guitar is $300, that one's $3,000, that one's $30,000. What's the difference? Yeah. They all look like guitars to me, and, you know, I don't know. You know, now one may sound better, and they can judge it that way, but is it 10 times better? Yeah. There's no such thing. Yeah. I explained to people, I said, to get good, you know, the distance from the floor up to where your belt is takes X amount of effort. Now, to get up from the thickness of your belt takes just as much effort again. And then to get the thickness of a finger above that in quality takes that much effort yet again, because you're trying to pull more and more subtle response out of what's just a wooden box. Yeah. That's it, with some metal or plastic strings.
That's the best way to kind of conceptualize that idea. Like, the whole $3,000 versus $30,000 guitar concept. Yeah. Like, it's like we'll try to explain to people, like, yes, the $30,000 guitar is better in some ways. Will everybody be able to tell? Not necessarily. Is it 90? No. Is the $10,000 guitar 90% as good? Yeah, because it's that those last percentage points that take just as much. Yeah,
it just takes so much effort. Yeah. Yep. And you know, and the other thing I tell people is just the raw materials for my guitars. You know, I'll spend $2,000 to $3,000. Yeah. Just in the raw cost. And sometimes I'm buying right from the people who cut the lumber. You know, and from the source country. And sometimes I'm buying with other builders, and we're buying together. So you can't get it any cheaper. No. So it shows you, if you know, that's my starting point. I haven't even put any work in yet, and I've spent $2,000 to $3,000. Yeah. You know, at least. Never mind when I get into inlay and all the shell and everything. You know, I've got all this old file cabinet that is holding up my bench. You know, half those drawers are filled with different shell species. You know, there's probably $50,000 worth of shell material right there, at least. at least, because I like to have lots.
Yeah.
So that when I'm doing something and I've got the picture of somebody and their arm and their wrist is right there, I'm going to search for a piece of mother of pearl, if I can, where the natural graining of it is taking a bend exactly where that hand would be,
Yeah.
where the wrist would be. And I'll spread all my mother of pearl out on the bench and search for it and hold it up to the light. And what's it doing on the bottom? And I want as much option as possible to get as close, to use the natural effects and natural particulars of the materials to enhance the three-dimensionality that I'm trying to create with all the engraving and the colors and everything. So that's what I do. Oh yeah, and a sidebar. When I was talking about the finish I do on the headstock, that because there's a finish protecting it, I can also do what I call surface treatments, shading with tints, or if there's metals on there, I can use acid oxidizers to create different shadings to them, which you can't do on a fretboard because it's raw and your fingers will pull it off. So any shading has to be engraving techniques, whereas I can mix both engraving and brushwork on a headstock, because it's protected.
Yeah, there's just so much that you do that it's really incredible. What does your average day look like nowadays? Are you pretty much solely focused on building now that you don't have the record label or not running a camp or anything?
Yeah, pretty much. I'm here 6 days a week.
Yeah. Building 2 guitars at a time.
That's right.
You told me.
Yeah. So there's always a half a dozen in process. So I'm still coming here 6 days a week, and there's still some other things I'm involved in. Like even in this building, we run it ourselves. There's no management. It's technically a condo, but we act as if it's a co-op. So we all do the jobs, and mine is running the admin account. So I pay all the bills and send people monthly statements and deal with the accountant at the end of the year kind of thing. So I still do that. But you're right, we've National Folk Music Awards, that was my idea originally. My wife and I are the last of the founders who were still on the board until just recently.
Okay.
I've literally, like just weeks ago, finished the financial side. I was the financial officer of it, and I've now handed everything over, even though I left the board 6 months ago, but I told them I'll finish all the financials for the past year. Now I'm going to focus on my writing. Right. As I've said, I'm not doing songwriting like I used to, but that's fine. That was my creative outlet for 40 years, and I wrote my first song at age 14. I'm sure it was horrible. I don't remember it, but it got me into the groove of doing it and figuring out how to do it.
Yeah. Doing that problem solving.
Yeah, and like anything else, you do it more and you get better at it, right? You figure out what's wrong. But so now it's the fiction writing. I don't know if there'll be another inlay book. There's already been 2. There's certainly been tons of impressive work that's happened since the last book, Grand Complications. 50 stories and 50 guitars. You want it in your home, yes.
The infomercial portion.
Yeah, and tell TNAG to stock them in the store. That would really help. Anyway, sorry, I'm being bad. But I don't know. People are asking, is there going to be another book? The one, Grand Complications, that was 4 years of work. I don't mean of inlay. That was 13 years of inlays that I selected.
Writing.
But writing, planning it, doing all the supplementary photos, and we shot tons of stuff. Only maybe 40% of it made it in the book. Anyway, it was 4 years of work, and then to write it, basically 50 essays.
Wow.
And the first one is a long one. And to be different each time, but also
cohesive.
Cohesive, but also try my best to really show what was transpiring in my head. The whole point was to go behind the curtain on the creative process as much as it's humanly possible to convey. How do you describe to somebody that from one fraction of a second to the next, a thought, a solution, or a thought, or an idea hits your brain? Where did it come from?
Yeah.
What was going on subconsciously that was putting it together? Your brain was working on it, and it shot this up, into a synapse that you could recognize. And yeah, that's how it could work. So I would try and describe, okay, what were the things I was looking at and thinking at the time that then linked me to this, which linked my brain to that, which got me to this. And because I save all my notes and preparatory stuff in files, I would open up the file, and there's all my handwritten notes from while I was on the phone with the person. And then I would reread them, and honest to God, their voice came back to me. Thank God.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a little bit of artistic, reconstruction. You imagine, remembered conversations and things like that, but in general, no. So I could tell people that was the point. It's not just to show off the work, but how did you get to this point? When somebody just said, "Oh, do peace." Well, what do you mean?
Yeah.
What's important about peace for you? Or as I describe in the intro in that book, literally I've gotten from some people, it feels like a novel's worth of concepts. And I'll say, okay, whoa. Okay, think of this as a film script. We have to focus on the central narrative. That's it. So what's the most important thing here to you? And then why? And literally, I do feel like I'm their psychiatrist or something, and I'm getting them to tell me what's important to them in their lives. And then we narrow down a theme and what aspect of the theme is important to them. But what a neat process.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Really.
I think anybody who's interested in you is going to be interested in inlay, but that the creative process aspect of it applies to anything you could possibly do.
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's the same thing. Where ideas pop into your head. Where do they come from?
Yeah.
What was your subconscious doing when you were busy doing something else?
Yeah.
It was absorbing things and putting things together, and next thing you know, there's a thought. There's an idea.
Yeah.
On the next novel that I'm researching, brain function comes into it, and I have been reading the latest on what's understood about the brain. And there's this woman scientist. Sorry, I've forgotten her name, but I've read 2 of her books now, and of course she was dismissed at the beginning, but now it's showing that she understood. Basically, there is no such thing as an emotional center of the brain or this center of the brain. There are different regions which focus on different things, but most tasks that the brain does, it spreads throughout the entire brain. Never mind parts of the body.
Yeah.
Right? It's directly connected to, not just to function but even emotion and things like that. But she's showing how what the brain does constantly is predict what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
That's how the brain functions. Whether you realize it, it happens in such minute fractions of seconds, you can't even perceive it. But that's all it does all the time is predict and try and look at what's in front of it or what it's absorbed through the senses and put a story together. It's just fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
And that's because my main character is going to be born with some unusual abilities, and I want it to sound plausible, even if it's fantastical, that it could happen.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand brain function.
Wow.
Yeah. But just like with inlays, I get all these topics. I have to learn about things.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm being paid to do it, to learn new things. Even this one for Simon is to learn, where was she from? This indigenous woman he wanted to honor, who was his friend. And then I learned about all the honors she received in her life for her social activism. But also what part of the world did she come from, and what culture was happening there. And so even when I depicted some portion of it with indigenous style of art, it had to be the style of the specific nations she's connected with, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I was learning all kinds of stuff. I'd never heard of her, but holy mackerel, look at how stuff. She's even been honored with totem poles and stuff, as well as by the state she operated in gave her an award.
Wow.
That honored her for her work. So I can see why she was just a great human being. I thought, I never heard of her, but look what I'm getting to learn.
Yeah.
I just, there's so many ways, that I just feel so lucky. And being able to make a living at it. And, even from the start, I hadn't even bought my first tool. But people knew I was leaving John and going to work on my own. I had 3 orders before I had gone to the hardware store and bought my first saw. I didn't even have a shop yet, and I had orders. And I have never had to do the typical trajectory for builders, not 100%, but so many certainly of my era, you do some repair work and some restoration work, and you build one on the side, and you hang it up in a music store somewhere on consignment so people could actually see it and try it and see that, it's going to probably hold up, and this sounds good, and it plays okay, like a professional, and then people get to know you, and then you get a few orders, and then you do less repairs, and eventually you can become a builder, and you just don't do repair work anymore. Never had to do it.
Yeah, you just
Never.
went straight.
I've had orders always, always a waiting list, and 51 years of it, and now my orders go like 4.5 years at least.
Wow.
At the moment, yeah.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to say lucky because you've done so much work to achieve all that.
I know you have to feed it, but luck is part of it too. It is, but the willingness to take advantage of the situations that luck has thrown your way, as well as then having the chops that maintain it once you're there. Yeah, you do need both.
Yeah. Well, you have been so generous with your time. I so appreciate you sharing all these stories with me and with us. And you've been such a fun person to talk to and to learn from. So to wrap up, I want to try a new thing where I do some rapid fire questions, just to get little tidbits about folks. So,
all right.
Number one, what is your go-to music, album, or podcast that you listen to while you work?
Gee. No. All right. I wish I could do a quick answer, but it's hard because it's the latest albums I got that are turning my crank.
Yeah.
And at the moment it is Peggy Seeger's latest album, great songs on it. Ferris and Jason Romero. Love them. And also the new Alison Krauss and Robert Plant records. Boy, do I love them. Both their first one together and the latest one, my wife got it for me. Adore them. So that and a new double album from Kathy Fink, Marcy Mercer, and Tom Paxton.
Okay.
And Kathy and Marcy produced it. They've been producing Tom for a while. I don't know if you know them. Brilliant performers, multi-Grammy winners as producers, as children's performers, but as adult performers.
Wow.
Old friends, old and dear friends. I know Tom too. But anyway, their new double album is fantastic. All the records, the songs are so relevant and appealing. All those albums I just mentioned, those are my current rotation.
Nice.
Sorry it wasn't a quick answer.
No, that's great. My second question was going to be a favorite album that you've discovered this year, so we got a
You got that?
Two for there.
There you go, yeah.
So what fuels your day, coffee or tea? I think I know.
Coffee, yeah. In the morning, I need it, but I can't have it past noon or so.
Yeah.
It affects my sleep.
Yeah. Do you have a roaster nearby that you particularly like to buy from?
As a matter of fact, yes.
Yeah.
But I get it from a company that buys their beans from a concern that supports small growers around the world.
Great.
Yeah, only small growers. And so I buy, send me another 10 pounds, in half-pound bags, and that'll do me, and that's what I do.
Nice.
Yeah.
What is a hobby or interest that people might not know about you, or that you have that people might not know?
Jigsaw puzzles.
I love jigsaw puzzles too.
Yeah.
They're so much fun.
Yep. I'll tell you, to me, they're such a treat because for an hour a night, I can't think of anything else.
Yeah.
I find it so relaxing, and yet I enjoy the challenge. It's a bit like my inlay stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, when I cut inlay, all those parts were separate. Just all cut one at a time, sitting on, and then I assemble it. And it's like a jigsaw puzzle that I'm putting together, and adjusting a few pieces when I get the fit better or it's too tight or something. But yeah, so jigsaw puzzles.
Nice.
There you go.
And asking for myself, what's your favorite restaurant in Toronto?
Our favorite is a Portuguese restaurant called Adega, and amazingly good food. We don't eat a lot of seafood, but when they do fish, it tastes better than anything we've ever had in our lives.
Yeah.
But it's also the environment, friendly, welcoming, unpretentious, but excellent food. So that was always one of our 3 top favorites, and our number 3 favorite also went under it's one down in the theater district that we'd always eat at when we were going to theater or anything nearby, or concerts in the main concert hall. It's all down in that district. It's our favorite one on that strip, and that hurt them so badly.
Yeah.
It was the pandemic that Now we just got to find some new favorites.
Yeah.
You know? But there's a lot of restaurants in Toronto. You know, and of all kinds. That's one neat thing about Toronto, that even United Nations has declared it one of the most culturally diverse cities on the planet.
Yeah.
Because there's people from everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And they have their own commercial sections. You want Little Portugal, Little
know.
Italy.
I looked at the map and I was like,
three different
my gosh.
Chinatowns.
Yeah.
Koreatown, Vietnamese, whatever.
I was like, how am I going to choose where to eat
Indian, the Indian food, and they have a main area and more than one. Greek, our home is near Greek, in the Greek area. But fantastic Greek food, Anyway, it's just a real pleasure. I mean, we're downtown. We're in the core people. We're not suburban types, and we live in town and we take advantage of it. We go to theater, we go to concerts, we go to films, we go to the museums, we eat in the restaurants, and that's what we enjoy.
Yeah.
Participating in life, and I find enjoying all the arts is what inspires my own creativity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I can't tell you how many good thoughts, good ideas have occurred to me when we're sitting at the symphony or we're watching a songwriter we love playing, and there's something about their songs that sparks something, and that happens all the time.
Yeah.
That people who stay only focused can only go so far. I feel that. I'm not saying that's 100% rule, but it feels appropriate to me that when you're open to other arts, other things in the world, your own creative output is going to be richer and more dimensional because of it.
I think that's definitely true.
Yeah.
Well, what's next for you? Are you going to be at Woodstock or any of the shows later on this year?
Not the shows this year, no. Partly out of COVID, I'm not attending any group events of any kind. Partly that, but even for me, do I need shows? I've got so much work. I'm so swamped with work, But if I was, I love Woodstock. Yeah.
Wow.
And I used to go down to Healdsburg a couple times when it was happening in California. And boy, that's interesting. The first Healdsburg I did was early on, when there were maybe 25 builders there. That's it. The last time I did Healdsburg, maybe the year before it stopped, there were 175 builders.
Whoa.
And they had to shut the registration list down because they were out of space.
That's crazy.
They had no more room for anybody else. That's what's been happening to the field that those of us who've been around this long have seen. And of course, the suppliers, Luthier's Mercantile, StewMac, all these, as more people were building, then the suppliers are making more tools and this and that makes it easier for people to get into the trade, and they kept feeding each other until now there's this, we really, really, truly are still in this golden age of handmade guitars.
I think, it really is.
We are so far, we're pushing the envelope. And what's neat about guitar is it's an instrument that hadn't finished evolving.
Yeah.
Like violins, Violin makers, contemporary builders, they're always competing with dead people. And they're having to trying to reproduce what was done before.
Yeah.
Whereas we all have the chance to push it farther, tonally, physically, all those things, right? Because it hasn't finished yet, and that makes it a little more exciting, because we know the carrot is always dangling out there, just out of reach, but we're going to keep trying to get there, because that's half the fun.
Yeah.
See what we can do this time. And we're all like that. Amateur builders and full-time builders alike. We're always excited when it's the day to string it up. Oh, we're going to hear what this baby's going to do, right? And I bring it up to tension, and I strum it a few times without playing anything just to get it vibrating. And then I take it over to my office, turn off the ceiling fan, shut the door, and play.
Yeah.
Not only that, but of course seeing a performer play your guitar and be inspired and make great music that's inspiring you and turning you on. That, to have that dimension to a physical thing you created, it takes it so far beyond craft. It really is in its own category, sitting smack in between craft and art in its own world. And it's really, we're making a tool, but it's a tool as the result of our creativity for someone else's creativity.
Yeah. It's a beautiful concept.
It really,
sort of circle of constant creation.
Yeah, it really is. And so it's a special field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is such a good note to end on.
Okay.
Such a high one. So
You are going to have an editing headache.
Oh no, I don't think this will be fun to listen back to. Thanks for listening to this episode of Talking Guitar. While we don't currently have any Laskins available, either new or pre-owned, you can always check out past media to get yourself inspired to jump on his 4 to 5 year waiting list. This will be the final episode of Season 3 of Talking Guitar, and if you've made it this far, know that I appreciate you so much for coming along with me for these luthier chats, and that I hope that you've learned as much as I did. Thanks for listening.